Norway. As I attempt to survive 100 days in this harsh land, I will have to face aggressive mobs, medieval sieges, and even some mythical creatures. All while I discover some of Norway's most iconic landmarks and build myself a large base for survival. Now with that being said, let's get started. Day 1. I spawned in and took a look around me, only to see that I was in some kind of forest. So, I decided to climb this tree, and upon doing so, I spotted these mountains off in the distance. I also spotted a structure, but it looked a lot like a pillager tower, and I'm definitely not ready for one of those yet. So, I decided to instead get some wood. But these sweet berries kept attacking me. Alright. After fighting some berry bushes, I began my walk towards the mountains, as I wanted to get a better look around me. But once again, I just kept walking into these bushes. I promise I can see, but these things just appear out of nowhere. Anyways, I spotted water and quickly crafted a stone pickaxe, as well as some glass bottles. I then got ready to fill the bottles with water, only that didn't quite work this time. Huh? Well, that is definitely not water. Try to add a special mushroom to it? No, I don't think I will. I figured that I must have made a mistake, so I crafted another set of bottles and tried again. But yeah, it looked like I did not in fact make a mistake. Now, believe it or not, I'm not the biggest fan of urine as a beverage, so my new goal was to find leather so that I could craft a canteen and drink water that way. I also needed to find wool, as this is hardcore, and hardcore nights are very difficult. Regardless, I crafted a boat and did a little river travel, before deciding to pull over and collect some more wood. This is also when I decided to burrow into the side of this mountain, as the sun was starting to set and I still didn't have a bed. I made this little window, perfect, and then got to mining that night. Next morning, I'd used up almost all of my pickaxe's durability, and the only ore I ended up finding was coal. But it doesn't matter, as I soon left my burrow and continued on up the river. As I rode, I spotted lots of different animals trying to swim in the river, for whatever reason, but you'll bet that I was very happy when I spotted a moose. You remind me of a certain someone. Anyways, I soon caught a glimpse of a structure, and eventually pulled over to go investigate it. Although I was really low here, thanks to the bushes. But as I approached the structure, I immediately knew what it was. The Hedel Church is not only a reflection of Norway's intricate medieval architecture, but also the largest stave church in Norway. See, the stave church was Norway's unique way of building churches, named after the type of framing that they were built upon. The Hedel Church itself is speculated to date back to the 13th century, and while this church was devoted to Saint Mary during Christianity's spread through Norway, it still has many traces of the Viking-era pagan belief, from its furniture to its engravings. Yet, as I entered the church, it was not the furniture that I first noticed, but rather the presence of some villagers and iron golems. But this distraction was short-lived, as I got a bit too close to a creeper. However, the explosion exposed wool under this carpet, meaning that I could now collect some wool and craft a bed. So, that's just what I did. And then this villager suddenly changed professions. So, I did some wood trading with him to get emeralds. Okay. It wasn't until I went near the altar that I found this chest. It had some strange but decent armor, and some other odd items, like this flute. Yeah, you like that? Anyways, I decided that I want some stone tools. So, I walked through the cemetery and got some wood. I then crafted the stone tools. And I also found this other chest. This chest had wolf leather and bear hide, but the bear hide is what interested me, as when I put it in my crafting slot, it turned into leather. This meant I could go ahead and craft a canteen as well. And so, I crafted a canteen and went to sleep. Next morning, I collected my things and left to get some water. But that's when this bear decided to get aggressive with me. Oh, that's a bear. After that fun encounter, I climbed this tree and tried to gauge where I was. That is... mountain? That's probably river, right? Wait. That is building. However, before I explored this new structure, I needed to get water. So, I went to the river and did just that. As I walked towards the structure, though, I saw a rather unfortunate event. What are you doing out here? Alright, can everyone note that that was not my fault? I did not kill that villager. After not killing that villager, I found myself outside the structure, only to hear strange mob noises from within. Being the cautious person I am, I climbed up onto the roof to get a better look at them, and they looked angry. Those are people, okay. But it was time for me to sleep, and so after sleeping on their roof, on day 4, I managed to steal what was in this chest. The cobalt leggings in particular looked really good, and I also got some hog meat. Yay. Anyways, I left the house as I was not battle ready yet, and I made my way to what turned out to be a river. This is when I debated just how strong cobalt was. Either way, I knew I'd found some good loot. But I now had a new objective, and that was to find a good spot to build my base. As I rode down the river, I made my way to what looked like the ocean. And this was a really scenic spot. My suspicions were confirmed when I spotted these whales, only they were not moving. Yeah, that made me feel a little bit weird, but I just kept rowing. As I rowed, I looked along the shore for either more structures or a good spot for my base. And that's when I sailed into this little cove with bears, and then decided that this would be the perfect spot for my base. So I started clearing an area for it. And the next morning, I cleared even more land. And by even more, I mean all of it. I did so much land clearing. Look at all the land I'm clearing. Like, you see the land and then I clear it. Anyways, aside from my clearing efforts, I also built an outline for my base. And yeah, that's all that really happened on day 5. Just a lot of busy and boring work. And day 6 was even more base building. I decided that I would head out to explore some more the next day, but for now, I was focused on the design of my base. See, I wanted it to have a Norwegian vibe to it, but still be something of my own creation. So I crafted this stone foundation, these wood walls, and I also broke my pickaxe, and almost broke all of my other tools. Yay, I love building. Anyways, as day 7 rolled around, I crafted a chest, as well as some new tools, before setting off to explore. However, I didn't make it too far outside my base before stumbling across something that I somehow missed earlier. Is that a shipwreck? And it wasn't just any shipwreck. The Viking longship was a staple of Scandinavia's Viking era, showing that the Vikings weren't just brutal warriors, but also skilled crafters. Consider the fact that Leif Erikson made a voyage to North America centuries before Columbus did. Yet, as Norway changed its chapter to the medieval age, these ships became more or less obsolete, and this shipwreck sits as a legendary reminder of who once roamed these seas. But trust me, medieval Norway is just as cool as its Viking predecessor. And what was even cooler, as it turns out, was the loot inside the ship. I ended up getting a cobalt pickaxe, a Viking shield, and a Viking sword. Yeah, I was pretty happy with my findings. So, I continued my expedition with a goal to find a new structure, and also collect some resources for my base. After setting up camp that night, I woke the next morning to some amazing views. And I continued my exploring, only to stop and collect some wood occasionally. Yet, as I sailed further along the coast, I spotted some lanterns, and upon reaching them, I decided to mine and collect them. But not before mining and collecting the cobblestone below them, only to realize that I was now a grave robber. Yeah, I was in a cemetery. But I did collect this war axe, and this throwing axe. Wait a minute, you're kidding. Yes, it is kidding. That's dumb. I continued my journey along the coast, and that night before I went to sleep, I did some much-needed inventory sorting. On the morning of day 9, I got back in my boat and kept rowing, only to spot some structures off in the distance. And one very big, but very cool structure in particular. See, apparently I was in southern Norway, as this was Oslo, and the very cool structure in front of the city was Akershus Fortress. Akershus Fortress was established as Oslo's primary defense in the early 14th century, marking a turning point for Norway as a country due to its unwavering survival of multiple Swedish siege attempts. This fortress is also a castle, housing many grand interiors, and also the graves of Norwegian royalty. Now, I think it's important to mention that in this video, I have the option to perform coastal raids on the settlements I come across. But these coastal raids wouldn't be possible without my amazing developer, Alfred. So go give him some love if you want, his Fiverr is linked in the description. As I approached both Akershus and Oslo, I noticed a boss bar appear, showing that Oslo had a lot of health. And a lot of targets too. This was an issue, as I didn't have a bow yet, and I really wanted to try raiding this city. After all, I can only imagine what sort of loot that would give me. And so, I decided to turn around and head for my base, as I wanted to get started on crafting a bow. I reached my base the next morning, but knew that I would have to wait for night, as I needed string, and spiders would most likely be my only other source. So, in the meantime, I did some base building. But when I went to collect cobblestone, I had a really strange encounter with a bear. Well, that's... haven't seen that one before. That was an interesting yoga pose. And then that encounter turned dangerous. Okay. Okay. That's not... you're not friendly. You're not friendly. You're not. I eventually made it back to my base, only to realize that my stairs were lopsided. But at this point, it was time for me to get ready to fight some mobs. And that night, I did in fact do some mob fighting. Only I didn't see a single spider. And with armored skeletons spawning everywhere I went, I eventually had to call it a night. The next day, this left me with a simple objective: to get string. I remembered seeing that the house I stopped by earlier had cobwebs, so I crafted a sword and headed in that direction. After a good bit of walking, I eventually reached the house, only to see that there was just one cobweb inside. My luck is truly exceptional. Anyways, I ended up killing a lot of these aggressive guys before calling it a day. And the next morning, I decided to check the stave church nearby for cobwebs or string. But once again, no luck. This left me with one option, and that was to just wait for nightfall again and hope that spiders would spawn. So I found a somewhat clear area and waited for nightfall. And this time, a spider did spawn. Where are you? Come on. This spider dropped 2 string, which was exactly what I needed. So I went to sleep. And on day 13, I got ready to attempt the Oslo raid. I headed back to my base to prepare, but was confused when I saw that the bear was now sleeping on the water. Didn't really know that was a thing. Anyways, with my bow crafted, I rode my way over to Oslo and made it there by early evening. I started with this wall over here, and I did some damage. But, as expected, the defenses soon arrived. Oh, that is arrows. And also did some damage. As night approached, I turned my attention to Akershus. I then found my target and aimed, only to experience the true meaning of being outclassed. Okay. What was that? What is... Oh, okay. That's... alright. I was really low, thanks to the defenses and the mob spawning as well. Okay. So, I quickly rode out of the bay and went to sleep. I woke on day 14 to some burning mobs, and then decided that I was not yet ready to raid Oslo. But I did want to see what was beyond the town, so I continued along the shore until I found a spot I wanted to get off at. I then healed up and did some hiking. Eventually, I climbed this tree, only to see a giant forest in one direction, and a structure in the other. So I made my way towards the structure, and ended up sleeping in this mini ravine. The next morning, I found myself getting hit by every berry bush in existence. But as I got closer to the structure, I got a strange message and effect. All it did was give me luck, but still, definitely strange. Anyways, I entered what seemed to be a smaller stave church, and took a look around. In this chest up here, there was some alright loot, with the best of it being this golden apple. As I left the church, I decided on my new objective, and that was to do a bit more exploring before heading home to do some more base work. As the evening sun set in, I found water and healed myself up, as these berry bushes were quite literally killing me. On day 16, I started my journey home, only I had no idea where that was from here. After following this river though, I soon came across another building. Only this one had a cool bit of history to go with it. Now bear with me, because I know talking about a roof sounds trivial, but sod roofs were actually a defining characteristic of Scandinavian architecture, especially in the Viking and medieval ages. These grassy roofs were most common in rural areas where the influence left over from the Viking Age was still the strongest. Believe it or not, these roofs were also incredibly useful, as they provided insulation and a strong structural support for the house. And it's not just grass that these roofs contain, but sometimes plants, like flowers or crops, or even entire trees. As I walked around inside the house, I found a good amount of food, as well as some iron. I cooked the iron in the furnace before leaving, and then ventured on down the river, only to find that I was now at a dead end. So I decided to cut through the trees and continue on my way through the forest, hopefully going in the right direction. That evening, I was happy to find more water, as all I needed to do was find the coast and then I could find my base. Next morning, as I rode through the winding river paths, I came into a clearing where two more structures came into view. I decided to explore the carriage first, and upon doing so, I found this lead, and this workbench named after Balder. Strange, but I collected it. I then went to explore the other structure, which was almost definitely a pillager tower. It was also probably the same tower that I spotted on day 1, meaning that I was going in the right direction. Anyways, I approached the tower and was almost immediately attacked. I killed 2 of them pretty quickly, but I managed to get the bottom spawner broken. Only I ended up in a very bad position once I reached the top floor, and so I made a quick but risky escape, before running through the woods. On day 18, I found myself doing mostly just walking, but I was now in familiar territory, which was a good sign. And by that afternoon, I had made it to the shore, which was an even better sign. Finally, on day 19, I began to follow the shoreline, and I was definitely curious as to what was in the opposite direction. But that didn't matter much, as the scenery around me was, once again, really incredible. Anyways, I eventually reached my base, and then used my lead to attach Mary to this post. And yeah, Mary is now my official companion for the video. As for the rest of the day, I built this mine and got some cobblestone, before starting on my sod roof. Day 20 was a house day. I continued work on my roof, and my idea for my base was finalized. As I worked on bringing my vision to life, I decided that I would go on another adventure on day 23. After all, I wanted to go up the coastline this time, and see what was further north. But for now, housework. This work continued through day 21, where I got lots of wood and continued my roof work. And yeah, this is not as easy as it might look, as I run out of materials really quickly. Regardless, I kept building and even did this dark oak trim, which I really liked. By the end of the day, I'd finished my first tier of the house. And the next morning, I awoke to some somber weather. But I didn't mind, as I'm personally a fan of the rain. And on this day in particular, I had to collect a ton of sticks and stairs. So yeah, the rain was kinda nice. I ended up starting on the second tier and doing a lot of collecting, before turning my attention to the expedition I would be facing the next day. On day 23, I got my inventory sorted and crafted one more canteen before setting off. As I rode out of my little cove, I noticed that the ox was also sleeping on the water. Because why not? Anyways, I followed this shoreline north, and after a good bit of rowing, I spotted some buildings. And some might be an understatement, as I had just come across one of medieval Norway's most important towns. Bergen is the perfect mix of history and charm, housing some of Norway's richest history right here on the Briggen Wharf. Although this might be the 14th century, these houses still stand here to this day, with 61 of them being listed as World Heritage Sites. Bergen was not only one of Europe's trade capitals at this time, but was also the capital of Norway until the turn of the 14th century, where we are now. And as I approached this legendary location, I noticed yet another boss bar. Yeah, okay, I can do raid on this one too. But I'll tell you what, I'm not going to. Not right now. I will later on, when I feel like I can fully take a raid. I explored Bergen and found myself connecting with the locals, before seeing what could only be a maggot. I mean, this is the medieval era. But that night, I stayed in this little townhouse. And the next morning, I did a little more exploring. Oh, okay, no, never mind. It's a bit weird walking around a town, thinking, oh, it's pretty, looks good. That'll also be really good for a coastal raid. Because yeah, I see those targets. I ended up stealing lots of lanterns and resources from my base, before coming across this signpost that listed Lofoten as a marked location. Wanting to explore yet another settlement, I set off in the direction of Lofoten, but as the sun started to set, I realized that I didn't have a bed. So I rushed back to Bergen and slept in the exact same bed. Yeah, big shout out to this villager for housing me twice in a row. I woke on day 25 and quickly borrowed this bed, and then went out into the harbor as I wasn't done exploring yet. Goodbye, Bergen. As I rode further north, I found a sight that I just had to see. The fjords of Norway are some of the country's most recognizable features, with some of the most famous of them being known as Lysfjord, Nordfjord, and the Sognefjord, with many others also named. As I rode through the fjord I had found, I got some really great views, before deciding to pull over and do some exploring by foot. As I walked through the forest, I spotted some more fjords in the distance. I then found my way to another river and decided to follow it. Along the way, I spotted many more animals, before pulling over and sleeping. I woke up to some more nice views before continuing up the river. At this point, my objective had changed slightly. Rather than try to find Lofoten this time, I was going to explore the countryside, as I had just spotted another structure. Only as I approached it, I saw that it was just another house full of angry medieval people. But what I spotted off in the distance was much more interesting. That's a structure. I made my way over to the windmill, and after getting close to it, noticed that it was in fact a pillager windmill. Because, of course it is. This didn't deter me though, as I collected wood and prepared for a windmill infiltration of sorts. On the morning of day 27, I began my infiltration. I started by towering up the side of the building, but this soon proved to be a mistake. I was in a really bad position, as I had no water to heal myself and was currently really low. I had only one realistic option, and that was to keep going. So I did. I carefully got towards the top of the windmill, and heard lots of pillagers within. However, I was still able to sneak some loot. I then decided to sneak around to the opposite side of the windmill, which was another bad idea. Yeah, I was really nervous here to say the least. But I bridged my way to the windmill blades and ended up sleeping on them. But the next morning, I wasn't quite ready to leave yet. After all, I had made it all this way, and I was going to get some loot. So I carefully snuck into the main area, but the pillagers quickly noticed me. So I blocked off this ladder and hid behind this post. I then ran from post to post in order to get to the loot, which was honestly worth it. I got better armor, some food, and lots of iron, all of which would help me out a ton. But I now had another issue on my hands. How do I escape? Well, the answer came in the form of some very cautious lowering, as I could not afford to take any fall damage. As I continued down, I heard a huge amount of mobs just on the other side of this wall. It would just take one of them to hit me, and then I'd be dead. But I got my way to the ground, and as soon as I did, I took off running. Yeah, I absolutely needed water now, and I didn't see any around me. So I slept in this tree. And the next morning, I continued in this direction. Only this time, I had to be extra careful around the bushes. Yeah, I was starting to regret exploring the countryside. But that opinion soon changed as I reached an open field, and it started to rain. The area I was in was a lot calmer and honestly really scenic. And I only liked it more as I spotted what looked like a farmhouse of sorts. I entered the house tavern structure and looked around only to find that the loot wasn't really great. And there wasn't any water either. So I stepped outside to see if there's a river nearby. This is when I spotted a colorful patch of forest, which I decided to take a look around in. But with my thirst only increasing, I knew that I had to head back to the farmhouse. However, I decided to look at the trades of each villager, and I realized that one of them was selling a bucket of cod. I quickly bought it and placed it on the floor, and yes, it gave me water. This was a very unexpected solution, but a solution nonetheless. I healed myself up completely, and that evening, I got some pretty unreal views. On the morning of day 30, I saw yet another nice view, before updating my objective to, I need to get home. But I was once again lost with no idea of where anything was. So I decided to use the One Direction theory. And no, that is not in reference to the band. My One Direction theory is that if I walk in one direction for long enough, I'll eventually find my bearings. That is, as long as I don't walk north. However, my lack of bearings was only illustrated further when I came across a completely different type of forest. But this soon didn't matter, as I had found a river. And as the saying goes, all rivers lead to the ocean, even though I've disproven that theory many times. But that doesn't matter, I still had hope. And that hope paid off by the evening. On day 31, I rode my way in the direction of my home, only I was much further north than I had thought, as I didn't recognize any of the landscapes around me. In fact, this day was almost entirely rowing, which is exciting stuff. But I did sleep on this cool little island, before waking up the next morning and continuing onward. But this time, I spotted something familiar. After passing Bergen, I made it to the Petrified Whales, and then got to my base by early evening. I also decided to name this little cove Sleeping Bear Cove, as I thought that made sense. Okay. I had time to do some roof work before heading to sleep, and the next morning, I decided on my new objective. my plan was to build up the base a little and then set off for a northern expedition. And hopefully this time, I would go properly north and reach the Lofoten Islands. Anyways, for this expedition, I would definitely need wool clothes, and also probably a ship. On the working side of things though, I started on the top tier of the base, and almost finished the roof. Also collected a lot of moss for this roof. And on day 34, I did even more roof work. This base was actually a lot more difficult than I had thought, and only because I had to stop and get resources so often. But as I did my roof work, I noticed this creeper in my basement, which made me consider doing my basement whenever I next work on my house. But that would not be day 35, as I was almost ready to set off. The only thing I was missing was some wool for my wool clothes, and maybe a ship. So I set off for Bergen to borrow some wool, and made it there by early afternoon. I felt bad because I disassembled a few of these little markets, but hey, I needed my wool, and I was going to raid this place anyways. For my ship, I stole some banners, as I decided that I would craft a sailboat rather than a full-on brig. And then, just like last time, I slept in a townhouse. As the sun rose the next morning, I got up and headed back to my base. After arriving, I crafted a sailboat, only to see that it actually uses wind-based physics to work. Oh, and I couldn't fit Mary into the boat, which made me upset. And so, I used the rest of the day to do some last-minute home improvement before preparing for the northern expedition. It was finally time for me to head north. I crafted my wool clothes and set off. Only the sailboat was limited to going south, as when I tried to go north with it, it was incredibly slow. So I ditched the sailboat and got in my normal boat, only I added a chest to it. And that evening, I reached Bergen. The next few days were used up by ocean travel. I started by following the coast, but eventually decided to go fully north into the open sea. Only it began to storm. See, this concerned me, as Norway is known for its maelstroms, or whirlpools. But hope was regained on day 41 when I spotted something in front of me. However, I could only assume that this was not a friendly ship. I rowed up to it and boarded it, only to see this skeleton Viking creature emerge from below deck. I fought off a few of them before checking the barrels nearby, only to see that they had some fun loot. Yeah, I think I know what's coming here. I climbed up to the top of the ship, but before I enacted my plan, I spotted land in the distance. That's land. Regardless, I placed the TNT and lit it. And the next one. Well, I messed this one up. Nope, what? How did that? Now the next one. And now I'm overheating. I spotted diamonds in the piles of loot below, and so I went down and collected them, but I soon had a close call with this skeleton Viking thing. With my pillaging done, I left for the nearby land. And upon arriving, I noticed that I needed my wool clothes here. Next morning, I decided to boat along the shore. That is, until I spotted these seals. After a bit more rowing, I saw that all the islands in the distance were covered in snow. This led me to realize that I was not at the Lofoten Islands, but somewhere much further north. Svalbard is a group of islands that sits right below the North Pole, and is one of the northernmost places in the world that people live. However, as I am currently in medieval Norway, Svalbard isn't actually populated at all yet. In fact, it wasn't even fully discovered until Dutch explorers found it in 1596, while trying to find a way to get to Asia from the north. But this just means that I'll be sure to see polar bears, as Svalbard is one of the best places on Earth to see wild polar bears, as well as many other animals. And that was quickly confirmed to me as I turned to look at more of my surroundings. That's definitely a polar bear, isn't it? This wasn't what bothered me though. No, it was the powdered snow that bothered me. But as I progressed through this icy land, I only spotted more and more polar bears. Now, I already did a segment on polar bears in my Alaska video, but I want to point out that the WWF lists polar bears as an endangered and vulnerable species, as their population is in decline. So even though bears in general can be scary predators, it's always important to be respectful around them. Regardless, I was soon distracted by this mountain that I just needed to climb. So I made my way up the powdered snow-covered mountain, and that evening, the views were genuinely unreal. And that night, the views became even more unreal. Next morning, I updated my objective to finding Lofoten, as I was definitely too far north. So I made my way to the southern part of Svalbard, but not before stumbling across these strange guys. The great auk was a flightless bird found in the North Atlantic, and I say was because, believe it or not, this bird is now extinct. Much like the dodo, the great auk was a large bird that was unfortunately hunted into extinction. And it's a shame, because these guys looked like a cross between a puffin and a penguin, which I think is pretty cool. Either way, it's safe to say that these birds were doing just fine in the 14th century. But as I left the birds and headed up on land, I experienced the closest call I've ever had in any one of these episodes. I sat in my burrow and waited for nightfall. And the next morning, I carefully escaped my burrow. After this, I ended up crafting a normal shield and then set off and left Svalbard. Yeah, I was going to keep my distance from bears from now on. I genuinely cannot believe that I survived that. Either way, I had to move on as I wanted to reach Lofoten. And I still wanted to raid at least Bergen. But as I headed south, I didn't make it too far before I went to sleep. And the next morning, I did some more rowing. Rain accompanied this once again, but that soon didn't matter, as I spotted land. Once again, I didn't recognize this land, but that was a good thing. And the land itself was really scenic. And so, I finally disembarked. I'm gonna kill these things. Every one of them. Anyways, I disembarked and did a little bit of walking before heading to sleep. But the next day, I found myself in a very weird situation. I ventured into these woods and came across what I can only describe as a tiny village with garden gnomes. But as it turns out, I had just found one of Scandinavia's creatures of folklore. The Nisa is a strange mythical creature originating in Scandinavia, where you are meant to leave porridge out for them every Christmas or they will attack you. Seems reasonable. But this piece of folklore extends to normal garden gnomes as well, because in Norway, garden gnomes can also be called Nisa. So yeah, these funny little guys are almost like a Norwegian Santa, except they're tiny and will hurt you if you don't give them porridge. Just like Santa. But at the time of recording this, I had no idea what they were, or if they were friendly. And so when explosions started happening around me, I was understandably cautious. And even more so when I ended up getting hit. Okay, that's alright, it's time to go, At this point, my new objective was to just get home, as I had done enough exploring for one trip. Lofoten would just have to wait a little longer. And so, that evening, I made it to the coast. And over the course of the next few days, I followed close to the shoreline as I made my way down south again. Yeah, this trip was pretty boring apart from the scenery. I just didn't want to go by the ocean again, as I had no real way of telling where I was. And as day 50 rolled around, I continued my rowing. But, as I always do on day 50, I wanted to take this day to say thanks for watching this far into the video. Anyways, the person who guessed where the video would take place first is Vascalopes8307, who guessed Scandinavia. Good job, Vascalopes. Now with all that being said, back to the video. On day 51, I made it back to Bergen, and proceeded to give it this half-friendly warning. That's right, Bergen. You should be scared. I'm coming for you. Not at all, because I'm upset that my recent expedition didn't quite work out as planned, but you know what, fine. People have to take out their anger in different ways, and I'm gonna shoot every one of your targets. That's an island. That afternoon, I made it to Sleeping Bear Cove. And speaking of the bear, he was now further out for some reason. I don't know, he confuses me. Anyways, I finished off the day with some last minute housework. And on day 52, I knew it was time for my siege on Bergen. Now, I only had 5 arrows, which meant that I could probably only partially complete the siege today, but I was going to give it my best shot anyways. I once again made it back to Bergen about midday, only for some reason, it was really foggy today. Fog aside, I started shooting. I ended up doing a decent amount of damage, but then had to face some archers. I kept going though, and even ended up earning a cobalt shovel, as well as some bread. But as I continued my siege, many more archers spawned in, and they soon overwhelmed me. Yeah, they not only destroyed my boat, but they got me really low. Next morning, I decided that if I was going to fully do this siege, I would need a boat that wouldn't break after a few shots. So I headed back towards my base, right into the foggy waters. It was actually pretty hard to navigate in this fog, and it didn't help that it soon started raining. Only I had no idea what I was about to discover. Whoa. What? What? No. No, no. 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 And as soon as it had appeared, it vanished. Where is it? It's quite literally just here. Everybody knows about the Crake, or Kraken, but few know that its origins lie in ancient Scandinavia. Mentions of this giant squid-like creature can be found all the way back in the Viking era. And believe it or not, the Kraken is not a resident of the Caribbean, but is said to be found in the icy waters between Norway and Iceland. The same waters that I was traversing. Needless to say, as I arrived home that night, it was completely understandable that the Viking shipwreck gave me a jump scare. What is that? What? Wait, is this my cove? It is understandable. Look, I only get scared by ocean things. I'd say this is pretty relatable. It doesn't matter. That night I shared a few words with Mary. Yeah, I know, Mary. Water bad. Water bad. Yeah, this is pretty though. Next day, I decided to do some work on my base and stay out of the water for natural reasons. I dug out the entire basement and began working on the flooring. I also collected a ton of stone before finishing the floor and walls the next day. I also made this little book area and congratulated Mary for shedding her antlers. Next day, I decided that once I was done with this set of housework, I was going to go ahead and sail to Lofoten. But before doing any more of the basement, I added these ridges to my roof, and almost turned into Norwegian John Wick when this creeper exploded near Mary. Finally, on day 57, I did my last day of housework for a bit. This consisted of me fully finishing the roof, and planting some of my favorite fauna at the top, before moving down to the basement to do some more work. Only this time, I had a little surprise effect bestowed upon me. This isn't... I don't want Jormungandr. No. Un-Jormungandr me, please. Wow, my basement looks so pretty. This is really great. I love basement. Basement is good. Next morning, I then set off for Lofoten. and noticed that the bear was now underwater. Surely that's not sustainable for him. Anyways, the plan was to sail to Bergen and then do the rest of the trip by foot, as I didn't want to be in the water more than I needed to. I stayed close to the shore as it started to rain, but made it to Bergen in what I believe is record time. I then ended up taking the path through the fjords. And then I disembarked on the same stop as before and continued my journey on foot. Only that night, I had to stop to look at the scenery. Next day, I found myself traversing the mountains nearby, and that's when I stumbled across this guy, the musk ox. Musk oxen are found in the Arctic, and Norway is home to the largest musk ox population in Europe, only they are mostly found in central Norway, within the Dovrefjell National Park. These big guys are known for emitting a smell during mating season that gave them the name musk ox. But for those of you who don't want to travel too far north to see them, you can always find them at the Copenhagen Zoo. At least in the modern era. Yeah, I don't think that zoo was around in the 14th century. Anyways, I decided to do a little more rowing as the terrain was getting difficult. And towards the end of the day, I found these cherry blossom bushes that I quickly harvested. Oh, and let's play a game called Why Is My Health Low? Whoever can guess it correctly in the comments gets Mr. Beast delivered to their doorstep. Next morning, I rode along the coast some more, until I spotted a big structure of some kind. And yes, it turned out to be a mushroom. Oh, it's a mushroom. I've had bad experiences when it comes to mushroom structures. As I entered the little mushroom village, I noticed a lot of these weird little piglin creatures that seemed like they wanted to hurt me. And so I did what I do best when it comes to giant mushrooms. I entered through the top. I eventually found the loot room, and after a little more careful sneaking, I collected the weird loot inside. I then snuck into this other mushroom house, and collected these really cool mushroom heads. Oh, and there's lots of iron and potatoes as well. On day 61, I left the mushroom village behind, as I really wanted to reach to the Lofoten Islands. So I did a lot more rowing, and found this lake eventually. This is when I spotted the windmill from before, which gave me a decent idea of where I was. I also used my famous treetop strategy to avoid the bushes. But on day 62, as I continued north, I came across something entirely unexpected. Did I walk in on something here? What? I tested their hostility, and it turns out they're friendly. So, naturally, I killed one to see what it dropped. Only it didn't. It just turned into a stone. And upon mining this stone, it turned back into the rock person. Yeah, really strange, but great. Kind of cool. Yep. Awesome. Anyways, I had to keep moving. So, I left my little rock dudes behind and ventured onward. Into greener trees. This hopefully meant that I was getting up north. Next day was a pretty slow day, aside from the amazing scenery that I got to travel through. Finally, on day 64, I took a quick stop to look at the crafting recipe for a bigger ship. Not only did I want one for Bergen, but getting back was becoming a concern, as I didn't want to have to waste any days on coastal travel. Anyways, the recipe required too many leads, and so I decided that a simple sailboat might be my best option. With that in mind, I continued forward into another type of forest, before noticing a boss bar. Yeah, this was a very different kind of troll. I began fighting it, only learned that it hit pretty hard. But I also did a lot of damage to it, thanks to my war axe. After a few more critical hits, I moved in for the final blows. And yeah, this thing dropped one mossy cobblestone. I was ecstatic. But I actually was a bit happy to see a golden field towards the end of the day. As I entered this field the next morning, I soon realized that this was not the same one from before, but it was honestly more scenic. As I traveled on, a big mountain appeared before me, and many others around it. It was clear that I was in the north. and from here, I would be doing some rowing. Next morning, I did a little more rowing through these islands, but as I turned this corner, I found what I had been looking for. The Lofoten Islands are a popular destination among those who want to see scenery unlike anywhere else in the world. Although it sits above the Arctic Circle, in the summer, these islands are as green as anywhere in southern Norway, complementing its historic cod-based economy. Speaking of cod, these islands first became home to fishermen in the 12th century, establishing a fishing legacy that would carry on to this day. I docked my boat and took a look through some of the modest houses. And as it started to rain, I realized that there wasn't much loot in here other than fish. But I did some thinking and decided to get some gravel here so I could get flints to craft more arrows for my siege. Only I soon spotted this fletching villager, and upon seeing his trades, it turned out I didn't need gravel at all. I got a ton of arrows and ended the day with a little more exploration. Next morning, I knew that before I left these islands, I would need to craft the sailboat. So I stole this wool from the tent. I collected a few more fish and cooked them, before collecting some wood off the ship, and finally crafting the sailboat. For some reason it made me slower, but I didn't really mind, as I was going to stay one more night. It took me forever to get here anyways. Yet, on the morning of day 68, I woke to some nosy villagers, before placing my sailboat on the water, and seeing that this thing was dangerously fast when going in the right direction. It's so fast. I didn't even get a chance to say bye to the islands before I was essentially shot into the ocean. Let's see if we can get home today. Only my plan to get home the same day was put in jeopardy, as I had to go a lot further west than I had thought, and this sailboat only seemed to go fast when it was facing directly south. So unfortunately no, I did not make it this day. But that's not to say that I wouldn't make it the next day, as after I was thinking through plans on how best to raid Bergen, I ended up passing it. Only as I sailed further south, I noticed yet another wild troll boss bar, and this got me thinking. But my train of thought was soon interrupted as I decided to do some whale jumping. Yeah, these controls might have been a bit strange, but I was definitely having fun. Soon enough, I made it back to Sleeping Bear Cove, before placing my mushrooms with Mary, and another mushroom, and also placing the cherry leaves. But as I walked into my house, I realized that my interior was pretty depressing. So, as day 70 rolled around, so did my next section of housework. My plan for now was to try and finish the interior, and then attempt the Bergen raid again. And trust me, I had a good plan this time. But I knew that I also probably had to choose between Bergen and Oslo. And because of how much I liked Bergen, I decided that it just had to be my raid target. That sentence was a bit weird. I like Bergen, so I'm gonna raid it. Yeah, I love my logic sometimes. Anyways, on day 71, I did some more interior work, and placed this Nisa house that I may or may not have stolen. And yeah, a little guy actually showed up. But I ended up finishing the basement on this day, before taking a look through some furniture recipes. The next day, I crafted said furniture, consisting of tables, cabinets, cool fencing, and a mailbox. Look, I know I'm not getting any mail, but it's the thought that counts. But by the end of the day, I decided that I was going to save the rest of the home improvement for another time, for I had a city to raid. And given that I didn't have a big ship, I instead had a clever plan in mind. I woke up on day 73 and immediately left to enact this plan, although the bear was now gone for some reason. Anyways, after quite a while of looking, I found what I was looking for. I let him into the water with me, but this guy was so slow. That made it even more difficult to lead him through this land. And yeah, his IQ might have been negative. Like, look at this. Yeah, this plan is gonna take a little while. I woke next morning to some ominous news. It was once again foggy. I didn't know why it suddenly started getting foggy, but I suspected Alfred might have something to do with it. As I crafted this bridge, I almost immediately noticed a strong current pulling me. It started to get violently windy, and then I spotted the edge of a huge storm. So I quickly blocked myself in nearby, and of course the troll was fine. Eventually I left my shelter and kept building my bridge, and the storm died out by sunset. Next day was another foggy day, and another bridge day. And I tried to get the troll across the first part of my bridge, but again, he was incredibly dumb. After a while, I managed to get him across it, and then I just kept on building. I couldn't even see Bergen yet, which concerned me, until I remembered that it was still foggy. But this changed next morning as the fog disappeared, and I could in fact see Bergen. However, apparently the storm hadn't quite disappeared, as I spotted some swirling clouds. Either way, I had a job to do, and this job soon changed into me getting a large amount of dirt and moss, and doing an even larger amount of building. And that night, I finished the bridge. That meant one thing. Day 77 was raid day. I walked the entire length of my bridge before leading the troll all the way back. It took forever, but we finally reached Bergen together. This troll was essentially a lost puppy, okay? But puppies aside, I led him to the archers that had attacked me, only to see that he didn't do anything at all. What's worse, I was now getting attacked by both him and the archers. I did not see this coming. Definitely not one of my smarter plans. I quite literally just made this harder for myself. But as the evening sun set in, I didn't care. For the next morning, I was gonna raid Bergen myself. I woke up ready to attack, and did so almost immediately. I shot multiple targets and got a decent amount of loot, before completely destroying this wave of archers. However, I was soon met with another flaming arrow encounter. Okay. Let's get back, okay. Before being met with even more archers. And this time, they hit me. A lot. But I persisted. I now had 3 targets left, and upon executing all 3 of them, I had successfully raided Bergen. The loot I got was really great, even though some of it was unexpected. But this armor looked quite stylish. I then took out the remaining soldiers, and after starting another fight with the troll, I decided to just leave him. I think he likes it here anyways. The next morning, I then snuck some lanterns, before heading back home. My current objective was to now finish my home, and then decide between taking down Oslo or taking down the Kraken, if it even showed up again. Regardless, I was met with a grim sight on my way home, as the storm had done a lot of damage. But upon returning home, I noticed that the saplings I planted on my roof were now fully grown, and they looked ugly. So I went up there and chopped them down. And that evening, I heard some strange noises coming from my Nisa enclosure. On day 80, I started work on my upstairs interiors. This is when I decided that while I finish my home, if it becomes foggy again, I would take down the Kraken. Okay. But my mind shifted when I heard a series of explosions coming from the Nisa. What have you done? What is this? Anyways, I finally placed my bed in the proper bedroom and then slept in it. And the next morning, I figured out that these empty mead mugs can be placed. So I had fun with that. I then built a nice dock outside my house and chopped down a few more trees. I was almost done with the base, and it was already turning out to be my best one yet. But full speed ahead. On day 82, I placed a ridiculous amount of reinforced fences, purely for decorative purposes, and the following day, I did the blinds and finished the roof detail. Not much happened these days, but I'm sure the Nisa downstairs would tell you otherwise if you asked him, because I kept hearing weird explosions. But all my wonderful housework came to a pause on day 84, when out of pure curiosity, I wanted to take Mary to see Oslo, and I also wanted to gauge its difficulty again myself. Midway through the trip, I thought that maybe I should have used the sailboat. Then again, the sailboat would almost definitely have traumatized poor Mary. Anyways, Oslo was back at full health. Oh, and I had forgotten my bed, so I quietly made my way onto the ship before being met with an angry man. I did get the bed crafted though. Now to save you from some more mundane housework, I'll summarize the next few days, as I only ended up traveling down this river nearby, finishing some decorations, and putting the Nisa in a proper cage, even though they kept blowing things up. But it was day 88 where something interesting happened. The fog had returned. Before I entered the murky waters, I crafted myself a diamond chestplate. Then I rowed my boat cautiously into the deep ocean. Yeah, it was really eerie. But the subtly macabre environment soon reared its ugly head as a massive storm swept by me. Waterspouts arose all around me, and I rowed as fast as I could. I eventually caught sight of the troll bridge, and that night, I could still spot the storm off in the distance. Next morning, I rowed my way back into the fog, but this time I decided to go a bit further south, and around midday, I found my target. I carefully took shots at it, and actually did a little damage, but it was also shooting at me, with water, I think. Anyways, I circled around it, and even as the sun started to set, I continued my fight. I thought I actually had a chance with this thing. Only, something huge happened. I tried to get underwater, but that proved to be a terrible mistake, as I was swept into the storm. I didn't even see the Kraken anymore, but to be honest, that's not what I was focused on. Although I do have to say, this was kind of fun. Besides the point, I was in a life-threatening position. But as I looked through my inventory, I found something that I could actually use. As soon as I got in this land, I began to block myself in, as the wind was still sweeping me towards the storm. So I burrowed underground and crafted myself a new boat. As I rode away from the storm, I saw the massive funnel, and promptly kept rowing. After a bit of rowing, I had no idea where I was. That is, until I spotted some familiar whales. But as I rowed towards my base, I became immediately worried that the storm had damaged my home. But luckily, that was not the case. Alright, Mary, I'm back. It's already sunrise, but I should probably sleep anyways for phantom purposes. I woke up next morning, and although I was tempted to never leave my base again, I decided that I would be doing one last trip, but with Mary. If you don't know, this is something that I normally do in the last 10 days, as I've spent a lot of time with these companions. And yes, they might just be mindless mobs, but come on, look at Mary. She definitely wants to go to Svalbard. But before we left, I knew I had to finish a few more things here, and upon doing so, my base was now complete. This was easily the best base I've ever made, and I'm actually quite proud of it. Next day, I said my goodbyes. Goodbye, house. Before getting in my boat and beginning the trip. And on the way out, I spotted the bear again. But we continued up the west coast, and saw some more storm damage, before seeing the storm itself. And it tried to pull Mary towards it, but I didn't let that happen. Soon enough, we reached Bergen, where I spotted my favorite troll. Once again though, I had forgotten my bed, so we stayed the night. And the next morning, I stole yet another bed from Bergen, before setting off. And as Mary and I continued on our way, I decided it was time to finally rate Norway's difficulty. Norway had some of the most surreal landscapes and views of any place I've visited, and it also had some particularly terrifying moments, including the closest call out of any of my videos to date. And so, for that reason, while it might not top the Amazon's difficulty, I'll be giving Norway a very solid 8 out of 10 in terms of difficulty. With that being said, before reaching Svalbard, one more notable thing happened. Mary and I stumbled across an island that I completely forgot about. So, let's talk about one more thing before we reach Svalbard. You see, Bear Island is technically a part of Svalbard, only it's over 200 miles south, or almost 400 kilometers south for my metric viewers. This island is so remote that it doesn't even have a consistent population, even in the modern era. But my favorite thing about this island is how it was named. Heemskerk and Barents, the same Dutch explorers from earlier, found this island and saw a polar bear swimming in the water nearby. So, they named it Bear Island. And as I continued sailing with Mary, I could think of a few more suiting names for the Atlanta airport, although I will not be including those in this video. Anyways, the next day we made it back to the skeleton ship, and I decided to do some last minute looting. Yeah, I might have gotten a bit too far, but we reached Svalbard that night. And on day 98, I decided for my final event, I would climb this mountain with Mary. Only it was really cold. Anyways, we went by boat, and I showed Mary the Arctic animals before crafting a campfire that night. Next morning, I decided to wait until sunset to climb with Mary. And in the meantime, we had a small blizzard. Oh, and I decided to drink this fish oil, and something completely unexpected happened. No thanks. Oh, hey, look at that. I'm flying. What? Is that what this does? This was so weird, but genuinely so much fun. Oh, it's about to wear off. Okay. Anyways, I ended up having to craft multiple campfires to keep me warm enough on our mountain summit. And upon making it to the top, we unfortunately didn't get any northern lights, but honestly, that doesn't matter. Finally, it was day 100. Mary and I rode a little further north and saw an even taller mountain that we definitely should have climbed instead, but who cares? I like my mountain more, okay? Anyways, as we rode, I thought back on the last 100 days and just how great Norway had been. You see, Norway isn't just a country or land, but a history and people that extend much further than this video, and I can only hope that I did it justice, as there is really nowhere on Earth quite like Norway. Alright, Mary. There you go. Okay. Mary, it has been an honor. With that being said, it is about that time. I hope y'all enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all in the next one.